We are going to hear from a group of folks with DataKind DC who worked with a partner called Education for Employment to analyze program survey data to show determinants of success for their client. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to these three folks from DKDC.
Thank you very muning. And if you could turn my camera on, that would be great. I think it says the host needs to do it. But my name is Taylor Wilson. I'm here with Yining and Haran. We all have been working on this project for a little while. There are other members of the team that aren't with us today, but the three of us are going to present on some of the work that we've done and explore the problem with you and some of the outputs that we produced for EFE. So the problem statement for EFE is that they are working with youth and individuals in the Middle East and North Africa in order to help them get a job. And if we can go to the next slide, the problem is there. Jobs across the Middle East and North Africa are really, really difficult to get, especially for people who are in job training programs or things of that nature. And for youth, especially, to get their first job is a major hurdle. And it is more so the case in the Middle East and North Africa than many other parts of the world. And so EFE works to partner with programs and develops their own programs where these graduates can ultimately find stable employment and hopefully be able to flourish, in their lives and their careers. So what they're interested in, what EFE is interested in, is what are the determinants of that success? How do people who go through these programs end up being successful in the workplace, and what the determinants of that are? So on the next slide, the main questions that they asked for us were, what characteristics are most associated with 6-month first job retention? The idea here is that the first job you get, it gives you a significant trajectory on being able to find the next job after that, or perhaps grow in the job that you get initially. And there are lots of factors at play in the Middle East that vary depending on where you are, country by country, nationality by nationality, funding sources in different countries vary. All of these things come together to create success or lack of success in certain areas. It could also have to do with the local economy. All these sorts of things are questions that EFE want to know, how do we make our programs more successful? And it's really framed as a program evaluation question, right? The idea is that they have these programs and they want to know what makes them successful. They want to know which ones were successful so that they can replicate that success in other places. Through our analysis of the data, we found that this is a particularly difficult question to evaluate because what they're really asking are causal questions, and they mostly have correlational data. So it's hard to say for certain that something causes 6-month retention or greater in a job when all you have are the types of survey data that they do. So ultimately, part of the recommendations that came out of our work with EFE was that if you want to understand causal relationships, you have to ask the right questions and in the right way with your surveys so that you can evaluate those types of claims. But for now, the task is a little simpler. The task is to say, well, what's just associated with more job retention? And maybe that can unveil some of the causal pathways later on. And we can set up experiments that will validate a lot of those causal pathways and give a real program evaluation bent to this. Within country variation is also key to understanding. So for example, in Morocco, there are specific programs that are created in order to place people in jobs that are associated with higher retention, because the government requires a certain amount of retention in order to be funded through these jobs. But that kind of program, that kind of government program, might not exist in Egypt or in Jordan. So you see influences on the data from those kinds of factors that are not immediately obvious. You might say, well, why is Morocco doing so well on retention? Well, it's because a lot of the way that their programs are designed lead itself to showing that retention, right? Or create programs that are meant to be that way. But in reality, a lot of those are temporary, right? They're government-sponsored internships. So after a certain amount of time, those individuals are no longer required to be kept on by those companies, so then they go back out into the workforce. So those types of dynamics are really, really tricky to understand, and asking the right questions in the survey was key. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk about what the survey looked like and how we had to change the data around in order to answer these questions. So when they collected the data from the individuals who participated in the program, what they do is they call them after they graduate from the program at regular intervals. And the way that the data are set up is each record in the data set represents a communication that EFE had with an individual. And they ask them a bunch of questions about their current job, about their previous jobs, about all these things. Well, in between those calls, you might have situations where the jobs were gained and then lost and then gained again. And it's very difficult to track somebody's entire employment history through the responses that they give. And that structure, while it's easy to store data this way because it makes intuitive sense, you call somebody, you want to collect all the data about them, you store that record in a database, and then you move on. It doesn't necessarily serve the analysis plan that they ended up developing later. And that was the key thing that we wanted to say to them, right? Was that when you create an analysis plan about data, you have to make sure that the data you have support that. So fortunately for them, a lot of the job data that they wanted to analyze existed in some form kind of embedded in their survey data, right? And one of the most challenging tasks that we had to do in order to even answer some of these basic questions was to restructure the data such that every record was a job that an individual held. So you could see very easily what job was their first, what job was their second, whether they maintained one job after the program, whether they were unemployed for the entire time, whether they had a job, became unemployed, got another job, right? A lot of different scenarios become immediately clear when you create these job records to be able to analyze that way. And you can link them back to the response records so you know who and what survey is informing information about those jobs. So that key recommendation is something that I think EFE plans to integrate into their process because they know they want to keep asking these questions into the future about first job retention. So having a jobs data set enables them to do that. We worked really closely with Yining, who I'm about to pass it over to build an interactive dashboard for them based on a bunch of these data so that any question that they have, whether it changes, oh, I want to know about Egypt, or I want to know about a different level of retention, or I want to know about this characteristic or that characteristic, they can dynamically interface with that data and it can be updated on a regular basis as new information comes in. So I'll pass it over to Yining and she can show you that. I think we have some screenshots, no live demo.
Thanks, Taylor. So this is sort of the bare bone visualization that we built for EFE. Like Taylor mentioned, I'm not sure if you can see me, I had to go on my phone. But like Taylor mentioned, a lot of the data was more correlationary. So we wanted this dashboard to be clear about the purpose that it serves and that it provides mostly descriptive analysis, being that if EFE is interested in sort of what the characteristics of the participants were like among those who were retained at 6 months and not, the top half of the dashboard was sort of what they can browse through to see, you know, these are the type of people they sampled, given also the limitation of, you know, how many of the total participants actually answered the survey question by the time that we received this data set. Because, you know, people getting jobs and getting placed were on a more staggered timeline. So this was our effort to standardize as much as possible. And then in the bottom half of the dashboard is sort of what you see as the outcome variable. So what were the job response records saying at the most recent time of interview? Yeah, so that's pretty much it. This is just sort of our way of providing a descriptive analysis for the team. I'll hand it over to Haran.
Yeah, if you could go on to the sort of feature importances slide, I think it's 1 or 2 ahead. Yeah, so one of the items that I was working on here was sort of building a predictive model. This was kind of, you know, as Taylor was mentioning, they were interested in sort of causality a little bit, and there was a lot of different factors to control for. So this was a sort of attempt to build a predictive model that could partly control for the different factors in order to kind of isolate the effect of some of the most important factors or some of the ones that they were most curious about, and also predict for new students what kind of the most important factors would be, and then their likelihood of retaining a job for 6 months, or their first job at least. So this is sort of the preliminary chart that we have. We're still working on adding more features into this, but as you can see, the kind of most important one was sort of lack of education. So no real, nothing too surprising there in terms of whether or not they had education before coming into the program was a large factor on it. Gender played a significant role. An interesting one up there is a sort of no desired program. So I think participants who came in that, they offer sort of different types of programs, and participants are given a survey at the beginning to select a preferred program. And it seems that the ones that came in with a specific program in mind had a much higher success rate at the end of the program of getting a job, most likely in the industry related to their program. And again, one of the things that they'd asked us for to deep dive on top of this is, okay, are there any specific programs that have, on top of binary, whether or not they had a selected program, are there any specific programs that had higher success rates than others, or had more likelihood of job retention, which is something that we're working on now. And sort of the other follow-up that we're working on is kind of, this shows the importance of certain features, and relatively, it doesn't show the direction of the impact. Some of them is a bit obvious. Obviously, you can see if there's no education, it's more likely to have a negative impact than a positive. But for some of the features, they kind of wanted to see the direction that the different values have. And another interesting follow-up would also be kind of for some of the more continuous features, trying to ascertain what the optimal value is. So as you can see here, class duration near the bottom was a feature that they had asked us to add, because that's something they were very curious about. As you can see, it has a little bit of importance, but the next question is kind of, okay, what is the optimal class duration? That's a continuous value there. So would be interesting to kind of see what the ideal class duration is, if there's like a saturation after a certain duration, or if longer classes are even detrimental to the impact, similar to other features such as years of experience. Is there a minimum years of experience there? And after a certain point, it doesn't really matter as much. These are all kind of interesting questions that this chart doesn't really answer. So that's kind of the next steps on that. Yeah, that's the project. So I hope you find that interesting. It's still ongoing. We've got a few final deliverables coming up soon. I think it's a pretty good overview of the problem statement and some of the approaches that we're taking.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much, you three. I think we all learned a bit about survey design.